On today's video, we're going to be looking at the top 10 best places to live in Latin America. Just to give you guys an idea, the number one city on today's video has incomes higher than 60 of Florida's counties. Only 7 places in Florida have higher incomes than that city, and only 3 counties in Alabama have higher incomes. I know many people are under the assumption that most places in Latin America are impoverished and crime-ridden, but the reality is that there's places in Latin America with significantly higher incomes than the United States and far greater safety. Number 10 is Panama City, Panama. The GDP for Panama City is actually higher than Puerto Rico per capita. Panama City is a center for trade and commerce internationally, with a lot of the economy also invested heavily in banking and finance. There's a lot going on in Panama City on an international level. This is the skyline of Fort Worth, Texas. It's actually bigger than Panama City by population, but look at the skyline of Panama City. So let's just give you an idea how much money there is in Panama City versus Fort Worth, Texas. I know people there like to brag about their economy, but it's dwarfed in comparison to Panama City. With a smaller population, it looks something like a Miami when you look at their skyline. There's definitely a lot of investment here. Now, I've talked to people who've lived in Panama City, and they tell me that the jobs here are generally better than in Costa Rica, but the violence is serious. I hear you can literally get your life taken for a cell phone here, or $20. So your life isn't really worth a lot in Panama. It's a great country for economic opportunities, but there is a lot of poverty, and there's also visible homelessness on the streets. Your life here is worth practically nothing. And while there's a lot of great economic opportunity, the most unsettling thing about this city is how little your life can be worth here, and how somebody will literally take your life for $20, especially people that are on the streets and seamlessly have nothing to lose. But despite that, Panama City continues to be one of the most economic centers in all of Latin America. Number 9 is Punta Cana, Dominican Republic. Now, the average income in the Dominican Republic right now is just under $11,000 a year. And while that doesn't sound like a lot of money, keep in mind that many counties in Alabama aren't too far from that, like Perry County, Alabama, where the average income is just $13,000 a year. Of course, the difference is that things in the Dominican Republic are more affordable, and in the Dominican Republic, most people own their properties and they're not indebted to their eyeballs like people here in the United States. I've worked in Perry County, Alabama, and you can actually make money there despite the fact it's a poor place. One of the biggest complaints people in Punta Cana have is that Haitians come to work in construction and they lower the cost of labor dramatically, and sometimes they live in very precarious situations, trashing up what is overall a pretty nice city. Other than that, most people here are on the come up. There's a lot of fraud and scamming here as well. Security is an issue. Most houses have walls around them if they got a lot of money. Most people just live a normal life. A lot of people have cars, good clothes. I mean, that's a lot of income and a lot of business in this part of the Dominican Republic. Most people have a nice, simple house. Some people are more extravagant. But unfortunately, Dominican money is new money, and some people haven't been able to manage the notion of how to handle new money. There's plenty of real money here, people with golf courses and mansions on the beach. In fact, palaces on the beach, you could say, for some individuals. I mean, after all, Dominicans do know how to spend money. But we have a saying in Spanish that some people like to fart bigger than their butthole, and for many people in the Dominican Republic, they tried farting too hard and they ran out of resources before they could finish their mansions. Some of them went to jail before they could finish their mansions, and it's kind of a theme in Punta Cana of houses that were started and were never finished. Many Dominicans really want to show off and build these McMansions in Punta Cana, but eventually they run out of money, resources, or freedom. A lot of other people are being scammed by developers who take deposits, start to build a house, but they never finish, which means in Punta Cana, there are definitely more than one ghost mansions. I think if you're moving to Punta Cana, I would definitely buy a house that's already built in a community that's already very well established. I wouldn't buy it in one of these developer speculation communities where eventually the houses don't get finished, and well, that leaves a lot of vacancy and opportunity for criminals. And these neighborhoods often become landfills, dumping grounds. You're better off going for a community that's already built, already established, A lot of people like to have their houses built the way they want. There's a lot of scam and fraud in the Dominican Republic. You're really better off buying a house that's already finished in a community where people are already living, the roads are already maintained, and not in one of these speculation bubbles where, you know, the grass isn't going to be kept, the roads aren't going to be maintained, and you have literally no neighbors. You're better off keeping things modest, and you can do really well in Punta Cana. I think a lot of the people that mess up here is because they want more than they can afford, and it's understandable in a country with new money. Part of it is the fact that Dominicans, like I said, struggle to manage their newfound fame and money, and the other half is individuals who've literally been scammed out of their money by thinking they were going to get a deal that was too good to be true. So a little bit of everything out here. There's bust and boom, and there's win and loss. In the Dominican Republic, things can go from 0 to 100 real quick. Number 8 is Zapopan, Jalisco, right next to Guadalajara. This is a suburb right next to Guadalajara that has grown tremendously. Now, Guadalajara is the second largest city in Mexico, and it is the second or third major economic hub of the country. Now, the state of Jalisco's homicide rate is 21 per 100,000. That's about the same as the state of Louisiana, so it's a fairly dangerous place. The homicide rate in Zapopan is about the same as Nashville, Tennessee, so it is somewhat dangerous here. However, the homicide rate in Zapopan is still less than half of Montgomery, Alabama, and a quarter of Birmingham, Alabama, and Jackson, Mississippi. Now, I got a friend that lives here in Zapopan, and I haven't talked to him in years, but last time we talked, he said that a decent rental here is about $1,100 a month, which is, you know, a little bit more than half of what you would pay in the United States. So housing is considerably more affordable here. There's also big lakes like Lake Chapala, which is a regional attraction out here. This area is also very visited by American and Canadian tourists. It's a really beautiful, nice area. I mean, it's safer than Louisville, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, and many other American cities. So safety here isn't ideal, but it definitely isn't outrageously out of control. The area is very wealthy. Guadalajara is the second to third biggest city in the country. So you're in a very large economic hub here. Now, just a few days ago, I had a passenger on Uber that was taking a flight directly to this city, and he was telling me that overall safety here is just like in the United States. There are some particular inconveniences because of organized crime. You just have to be careful what you do and how you move out here, but it isn't tremendously out of control. By far, living in a large urban area gives you a huge safety advantage versus living in a small town where things can happen more kind of anonymously. This passenger also told me that in the last few years, shootings in open markets and places that are public in the daytime even have become normal. So safety here isn't ideal, but it's just something you have to live with, probably the same as any large metropolitan area at this point. The average income in the city of Guadalajara per capita is higher than Bibb County, Georgia, where Macon sits. So it's about like any other city in the South when it comes to income. And just like with Punta Cana, you have to be very careful what you buy in Mexico. Now, I have no idea what this image is about. I just found it on Google Maps. But you can see that somebody says that be careful buying from a particular company because they won't come through on the sale. And that right there is a theme across much of Latin America. So, like I said, buy something that's already built. If you're looking for suburban living, going with ordering a house can sometimes end up with your money disappearing. Number 7 is Merida, Yucatan, in the peninsula of Mexico. I guess the cops must be keeping a close eye on the community here to make sure everything looks good, because this city has the lowest homicide rate of anywhere in the Americas at less than 3 per 100,000. The same can be said about the entire state of Yucatan. Now, Merida isn't the most wealthy place in Mexico. It's the safest place in Mexico. In fact, you are 5 times more likely to be a victim of a homicide in Nashville, Tennessee than you are here. If you're more interested in this city, there's actually a Cuban YouTuber that does videos in English, very similar to my YouTube channel. In fact, he's also as upset at the world as I am, so it's kind of like a twin of mine out there doing the same exact work I'm doing in Florida, in Mexico. But anyways, He's a Cuban who got tired of the United States and being abused by the racist southern white man and moved to Mexico, where he's having a beautiful life in Merida, where life is more affordable. Anyways, if you just write Merida, Mexico, his videos are almost certain to come up. And this guy really gives you like a real life feel for this place, kind of eerily similar to my YouTube channel, but in Mexico. Now, one of the benefits of living in Merida is you have access to beaches like Playa del Carmen, Cancun. The problem with Quintana Roo is that Quintana Roo's homicide rate is 10 times higher than Yucatan. So while there are better beaches, a lot more investment and development here along the coastline, it's definitely considerably more dangerous as well. In fact, I follow a YouTuber that lives out of here that has over 1 million subscribers, and he recently had his house broken into and robbed. Apparently somebody had a key to the house and got right in and took $15,000 worth of recording equipment. Now, I really want to focus a little bit on Playa del Carmen. I really wanted to include this place on today's list for its beautiful beaches and awesome vibes, great investment, gated communities. But with Quintana Roo's homicide rate being 2 times higher than Nashville, Tennessee, it's just too dangerous to live here. And that means that I can't recommend a place that's extraordinarily dangerous. But I really do want you guys to know that if you move to Merida, you'll have access to Cancun, Playa del Carmen, Tulum, Cozumel. All that is in this area. So, well, Merida isn't much of a place. You know, you get in a car, you travel a little bit, and you can end up in some pretty cool beach towns. Now, that elevated homicide rate in Quintana Roo is on par with cities like Louisville, Indianapolis, Cincinnati, and Cleveland, Ohio. So it isn't the absolute worst. It's not a Detroit or St. Louis, but it's still too high for comfort. So I did want to include Quintana Roo, particularly Playa del Carmen, on here, but with the increase of violence here, it just couldn't make our list. On the plus side, it does appear by Google Images that you can drive an ATV on the road. Number 6 is Monterrey, Nuevo León in Mexico. And by the way, it's spelled with 2 R's instead of 1. Just now figured that out. I'm seriously too lazy to go back and fix that. So I guess in theory it's not Monterrey, it's Monterrey. You just gotta like twice, you know. This is now the second most important economical place in Mexico other than the capital. It has recently overtaken Guadalajara because of how much economical growth this area has seen. You can take a 2.5-hour drive north of here and you're at the US-Mexico border. And that's probably why a lot of Mexicans like to live here, because it's close to the US. Now, the homicide rate here in Nuevo León for the whole entire state is 15.9 per 100,000, which is about the same as Nashville, Tennessee. And you're actually more likely to be a victim of a homicide in the state of Alabama than you are in the state of Nuevo León. So that's kind of what a lot of people don't get about safety in Mexico, is the fact that many places in the United States are kind of worse. Monterrey's per capita income is $20,000 a year, and its purchasing power is the third of any Mexican state. And just so you have a comparison, the state of Kentucky's per capita income is only $2,000 a year more than the city of Monterrey. So it's just about the same as the state of Kentucky when it comes to income. So, like I said, many times people think that other Latin American countries or places are just considerably poorer than the United States, but that's not exactly the case. And when you consider the cost of living in Kentucky versus the cost of living in Mexico, and the fact that, again, in Mexico, a lot of people own their properties and they're not so indebted, it's very likely that the standard of living here in Monterrey is significantly higher on average than the state of Kentucky. Plus, they have beautiful mountains and beautiful cities with skyscrapers and all that, so you can't compare it. Number 5 is the state of Santa Catalina in Brazil, with cities like San Jose and Florianópolis. This really is an incredible place to live. It's known for overwhelming natural beauty, rocky beachy shorelines, and of course, some of the most beautiful...
Most beautiful what? You better be talking about beaches.
I am. Chill. Relax. Do now. So over the years, I've actually met a lot of people that have lived here, and their experiences are just incredible. They love this place. Now, the average person here makes almost $1,000 a month, which I would think should be enough to live in Brazil, but I have a friend that's from Brazil, and he tells me that's definitely not enough to live in Brazil. But regardless, that's still a decent salary for Latin America. The state of Santa Catalina has the third highest incomes in Brazil. Sao Paulo has more millionaires or even billionaires per capita, but it's a larger city with more crime. Here it's more chill, so despite the fact it's not exactly the richest place in Brazil, it does offer you kind of a smaller town lifestyle, less big city crime. Now, there are favelas and bad neighborhoods here. It's not perfect or ideal, but for being in Brazil, it's about as perfect as it gets. The place is known for its incredible natural beauty. The place is also fairly affluent for being in Latin America, fairly safe for being in Brazil. Brazil has really horrible homicide rates, but this part of the country isn't the worst. So it's overall a really great place to live in Brazil. You're going to have to falar português to live here, but it sounds very similar to Spanish, so a lot of Spanish people find it a good transition. I recently had an Uber passenger who was from Cuba. Now, she was on temporary status and it recently got revoked by the current administration. She told me that despite the fact she made less money here in Brazil than she did in the United States, that she actually misses living here because of how fun and party going the people were. She did tell me that one night they were out late and somebody stole their phones from them at knife point. Before coming to the United States, this person also lived in Monterrey, Mexico, and she said she loved the city except for the fact that at night the cops would be out patrolling with freaking, like 4-foot machine guns, and she says that scared the crap out of her. So overall, she told me that out of all the places she's ever lived, including Sarasota, Florida, her favorite place to live was here in Santa Catalina, where she had a job working in the medical field, and she did really well. Now, her status is currently being revoked. I hope she's able to go back to Brazil because she told me it was just the most fun party-going people she ever met, and I can confirm that. I've known a lot of people from here, and they really like to party hard. Number 4 is the Costa Rican coastline. Now, the city of San Jose is a little bit crimier than you would probably think. Costa Rica, we know, is like a top destination for people relocating to Latin America. Now, the incomes here are a little bit less than Panama, but it is far safer, and the people are known as some of the most hospitable and welcoming people in all of Latin America. But there is one issue with building and development here, is that many of the locals are afraid that their natural reserves and other natural settings are being destroyed to make room for large hotels and resorts for people that are actually foreigners. Now, Costa Rica in Spanish means rich coastline, and it isn't a surprise that most of the great places to live here are along the coastline. There isn't one particular town or hub. It's kind of just along the coastlines is where most of the wealth is. And you can see here a hotel being built right next to the jungle. What makes Costa Rica beautiful is its natural settings and pristine wildlife and just forest. All that is also under threat by builders and developers who are literally tearing down pristine jungles to create beachside resorts. And there's also a lot of particularities about Costa Rica that we're not going to have time to talk about on today's video, but the general idea is that the locals are friendly, good, nature-loving people who care about the preservation of their country's natural resources. The other issue here is that Costa Rica doesn't invest any money into military spending. It spends all of its money on its people. So it's a very safe place to live with great public services, much better than anywhere else in the Americas. Like I said, the economy here is not as good as Panama, but the safety is a far superior aspect. And many of the workers here are actually from neighboring Nicaragua. They're doing all the construction and infrastructure work because Costa Ricans don't want to do work that's that hard. Despite that, Americans and other foreign nationals moving in have actually risen the prices so much that the average person here is struggling to get by. So everything isn't a fairy tale dream in Costa Rica. There really are some real concerns in this country, particularly for the citizens who have to deal with the cost of living here now almost being on par with the United States. Despite that, many people that are from here can barely scrape up $700 a month, which is a problem because that's about what a small rent costs now in the country of Costa Rica. Despite that, it's still a great place to live, and unfortunately, people moving here has made life fairly difficult for the residents. Issues like deforestation for development is probably one of the biggest concerns people have here, so it's been somewhat of a two-edged sword for Costa Rica. Yes, their country is an attractive place. Yes, they're welcoming people, but their natural resources is what makes their country beautiful, and all of that is in peril today because of development and growth. If you'd like to learn more about Costa Rica, Araya Blogs is my favorite Costa Rican YouTuber. He travels the entire world, but he has made plenty of videos in Costa Rica, and his perspective about what's really happening in that country to me seems like the most comprehensive. If you live in Southwest Florida, like much of our audience, there's a place in Bonita Springs called La Paz. It's a Costa Rican restaurant. I definitely recommend it. The city of San Jose itself really isn't the place to be. Driving around at night, you'll see women walking on the corners and stuff like that. Seems like it's legal there. You'll see people hanging out. It doesn't really seem like the type of place you would want to live. So San Jose kind of falls short of your expectations for it's just a great country. But like I said, it's called Costa Rica for a reason, for the coastline. The large urban city really isn't the place to be here. Number 3 is Buenos Aires, Argentina. There's a lot of wealth and money in this city. 3.1 million people live in Buenos Aires, and a lot of those people are living high on the hog. Houses the size of castles, pools in every backyard, and of course boats to get out into the ocean. Now this isn't your Tennessee River pontoon. These are like mega yachts. But it's really the culture and arts that makes Buenos Aires an incredible city, not so much the wealth that exists here. In fact, some of the most dangerous inner city neighborhoods here, any city in Latin America of 3.1 million people, will certainly have some rough areas, but like anywhere else, you make a living how you live. Some people here live really good and some people don't. For the most part, the standard of living in this city is exceptionally well for being in Latin America. Per capita incomes here are somewhere around $12,000 to $13,000, and that's not exceptionally high, but again, it's not an exceptionally expensive country. Most of the immigrants here are actually going to be Europeans, and they're known for having wine, not beer. People here like to eat fancy cheeses. They're definitely classier than most people in Latin America. For one, their music is a little bit more refined. They're just classier people all the way around. The beaches are a huge attraction in Argentina, and despite the fact that the water's freezing cold, they make the best of it. Recently, during a live stream just last night, I ran into some kids that were vacationing in Sarasota from Buenos Aires, Argentina, and they were telling me that if you want to party and meet women and just have a blast, that Buenos Aires is definitely the place to do that.
Buenísimo.
Elegante, mucha.
Si querés joda, mujeres, Buenos Aires.
Oye, la playa, el agua está muy
La
fría.
playa está a 3 horas y media de
Sí.
Buenos Aires,
Pero el agua es muy fría ahí. En Buenos Aires la playa está muy fría, el agua o no.
no, es frío, una mierda. Te acostumbras,
Te acostumbras, ok.
Your chances of being a victim of a homicide in Buenos Aires, Argentina is 3 to 4 inhabitants per every 100,000. The only city in the United States that even comes close to that is San Diego, California. So basically, 95% of American cities are more dangerous by homicide rate. It's an extraordinarily safe city. Your chances of being murdered in Birmingham, Alabama are 25 times higher than Buenos Aires, Argentina. Number 2 is Santiago de Chile in the country of Chile. They have the tallest skyscraper in Latin America with almost 1,000 feet high. The height of this building is almost 2 times higher than the tallest building in the skyline of Louisville, Kentucky. Santiago is easily one of the most beautiful and well-developed cities in all of Latin America. Unfortunately, a prosperous country in Latin America attracts a lot of migrants, many of whom come here homeless. Cubans, Venezuelans, and Haitians have arrived here, and they've created tent cities in the interstates. Now, this is a place that is on par with the United States with standard of living, and unfortunately, some of the similarities with the United States also include homelessness and addiction, something you don't see in most of Latin America, but Chile really is kind of more like the United States and Canada than it is the rest of Latin America. And that's a great thing economically, but it's a horrible thing socially. Despite the fact that Chile is a beautiful country, it is dealing with some serious problems, many of the same problems that we're dealing with here in the United States. And while it hasn't become a scary and dangerous place yet, it is on track to being there, and that is because Chile has seen an increase in violence and crime, just as it has simultaneously seen an increase in immigrants from countries like Haiti and Venezuela, where crime is more prevalent, making this country kind of a very polarizing place. On one side, you have incredible infrastructure, you have incredible investments and a very high standard of living, but then you also have a lot of homelessness and addiction and migrant camps. All this combines to make Chile kind of like a piece of the United States or Canada in Latin America, and it really is polarizing to see the two worlds that coexist here together. If you're relocating across Latin America, Santiago should definitely be on the top of your list as a world-class city. It's facing a lot of problems, but it also has a lot of prosperity. The other issue here is that it's a somewhat bland place. It kind of reminds me of Denver, Colorado, where everything is subreal in its suburban nature, where everything looks artificially nice, but at the same time somewhat soulless. But I guess that the issues that Santiago is facing are kind of the issues that come along with capitalism and fast growth and development. Your chances of being a victim of a homicide here are 2 per 100,000, which means that if this city was in the United States, it would be the #1 safest city in the country. So safety here far surpasses anything in the United States. In fact, you are almost 40 times more likely to be the victim of a homicide in Jackson, Mississippi than you are here. Just think about that. This city, if it existed in the United States, would be the safest city in the whole country. And that's with a homeless migrant crisis as well as an addiction crisis that the country is in right now. So even with all those problems, it's still safer than anywhere else in the United States. The biggest complaint of people who've lived here is how bland the food is and how boring the place is in general. It's kind of soulless. #1 is Montevideo, Uruguay. Los Uruguayos. Yes, the per capita income here is over $30,000. The state of Kentucky has 120 counties. If Montevideo was a county in Kentucky, it would have the second highest income. The standard of living here is above most of the United States landscape. It would fit in perfectly with the United States when you talk about incomes. Now, there is a lot of social unrest here because Uruguay requires that everybody has to vote, and many people consider that an overreach of democracy. And in fact, if you look through the city, you'll see graffiti everywhere denoting people's discontentment with the government forcing people to vote. Those who don't vote are punished severely, and while this is a huge social issue in this country where politics are pretty much shoved down your throat. Despite that little discontentment with the politics here, people live a pretty good standard of living. Interestingly, there aren't hordes of immigrants moving to Uruguay. It's somewhat of a bland and soulless place. And in fact, the profile of this place doesn't really fit in Latin America. It almost feels like it's somewhere in Europe. It's just too slow paced, too quiet, and the people here are not extravagant. They don't spend money on cars. They don't blow through money like people in the Dominican Republic. In fact, the most interesting thing about this place is despite the fact people here make as much money as in the United States, there's other Latin American countries where people actually spend more money on things like cars and clothes. The culture of the people here is to be reserved, conservative, drive modest vehicles, or drive vehicles for centuries until they're driven to the ground. This is the mindset of people here. They don't have a consumerism mindset, but combine that with great incomes on par with the United States, and you could assume that the average person here has very good savings and that economically their future is in very good condition since they refuse to spend money on a Ferrari and still drive the horse wagon despite the fact they're making American levels of income. Perhaps the attitude of people here being conservative and not spending and not pursuing too much is probably what makes it unattractive to Latin American immigrants who want to live in the middle of the hype, not in the middle of the depression socially. Despite that, this place's financial decisions have been good, and that makes it a very prosperous place, but a place that just doesn't attract that many immigrants. living here really is boring, and for the most part, that's not something Latin American immigrants are looking for. You can say that culturally, this place is the complete opposite of Punta Cana, but perhaps economically, the people here have figured out that they can live a pretty good standard of life without making too much noise and without having to presume about what they got. You're just not going to find Uruguayans on social media bragging about their new BMW or about their Jeepeta Bacana like Dominicans will. But at the end of the day, it's kind of the blandness of this place that makes it obsolete. I hope you guys have enjoyed our video. These are the top 10 best places to live in Latin America. If you disagree with my video, let me hear your thoughts and opinions. I've always felt that many times immigrants are as ignorant about the United States as Americans are ignorant about Latin America. For the most part, there's places in Latin America where the economics of living make more sense than the United States, but it's always the American dream. People leave behind so many great things in their native countries or in Latin America, thinking that in the United States they're going to find something better, only to discover that perhaps along the way here, they went through places that were overall better to live for them than the United States. On top of that, many of the countries we've talked about today are actually really good at accommodating immigrants. We didn't really talk too much about Paraguay on today's video, but I did a lot of studies on Paraguay, and it's a country that offers people easy citizenship status. You get a 2-year period to be a resident. You can become a citizen quickly within 4 years. And then it's just that simple to become a citizen of Paraguay. But despite the fact that there are countries that have good economies and good stability and great opportunities, immigrants continue to come to the United States as if there weren't opportunities in other places. But today, countries like Brazil, Chile, and Mexico are going to start to reabsorb these people. And perhaps in these countries, with better laws to accommodate their situations, they can find another place that's more welcoming than the United States and that will probably give them better long-term economic solutions, because the long-term economic solution for the people is really better in Latin America. The United States is just a short-term quick solution that many times backfires for many people. The crazy thing about people with temporary status right now in the United States, Cubans, Haitians, is that they actually go to Brazil, they go to Spain, they go to Chile, they go to Costa Rica before they end up in the United States. And many times they don't consider these countries as a place where they can stay. It isn't so much about finding a place where they're safe from the turmoil in their country. It's more about chasing this American dream that doesn't even exist anymore. Many Cubans and Haitians even end up working in countries like Chile or Brazil for many years to save up enough money to make the trajectory into the United States, which is interesting because once they come to the United States, they find that they can't save any money with the cost of living. It's a total pipe dream and misleading storyline that they're led to believe that prosperity is in the United States when there is so many great things happening in Latin America.